mouthy women, women who aspire to be mouthy, and men who support mouthy women. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted you've come to the inaugural edition of Unbitten Tongues. I'm Amanda Periag. I'm the president of Media Action, the national not-for-profit organization that works to promote the positive representation of girls and women in the media. Media Action stays relevant because of the incredible impact the media has on shaping both our individual and collective perceptions of women and girls. Who we are, what we should look like, what we should want, how we should behave. For 35 years, our organization has used research, education, and advocacy to improve the ways in which women and girls are portrayed and represented. And Shari Graydon, who leads Informed Opinions, our current flagship project, has been involved for 20 of those years. Shari obviously started this work when she was 5. But we are thankful that she started this work and for her dedication, because since launching Informed Opinions 5 years ago, Shari has put her background as a newspaper columnist, TV producer, communications instructor, and feminist activist to remarkable good use. To date, the Informed Opinions project has trained more than 1,000 women across the country to share their informed opinions on everything from climate change to sexual assault, tax policy to vaccination, prison reform to affordable housing. Hundreds of those women have since written and published intelligent, thoughtful analyses in daily newspapers and online sites. Hundreds more have said yes to media interviews they previously would have turned down. As a result, Informed Opinions has helped to move the needle, increasing women's voices in daily papers and on TV and radio broadcasts all across the country. But the project's ambitious goal is to actually bridge the gender gap in Canadian public discourse by 2020. Now, where's Shari? Do you realize that's 5 years from now? Okay. All I can say is thank goodness that you're here, because if you haven't already done one of the Informed Opinions workshops, Shari will be tackling you before you leave tonight, I'm sure. And that's also why she's lined up this incredible panel of fabulous women to inspire you to stop biting your own tongues. I give you the incredible Shari Graydon.
Thank you, Amanda. Amanda is actually one of the reasons that I'm still involved with Media Action all these years later. Not every board has a fabulous, fun, and engaging and easy to work with president like Amanda, so I'm delighted to have the pleasure to collaborate with her. Before I introduce this evening's role models, I would like to pay tribute to this month's most famously unbitten tongue. That would be the one operated by Shauna Hunt. We dreamed up this event many, many months ago, but Shauna Hunt's smackdown on Twitter of those misogynist juveniles a week or so ago made the event even more relevant than usual by drawing attention and engaging us all in a conversation about some stuff that really shouldn't be happening anymore in 2015. And the truth is, there's all sorts of other stuff that really shouldn't be happening anymore in 2015. And what it takes is women who are willing to speak up and draw attention to those things that shouldn't be happening, to engage us in the conversation and help us come up with solutions. How many of you have already heard my story about David and the Pope? Please raise your hand. Okay, we haven't quite reached critical mass. I'm going to keep telling this story until it's no longer necessary. Actually, Kate Hartfield knows this story so well that she now tells it herself, I understand. 10 years ago, my husband David and I were walking across the parking lot of St. Patrick's Basilica in Montreal. A television crew approached us and said, "The Pope has just died. Would you care to comment?" And I said, "No, I don't think so," and kept walking. From behind me, David, who had not been to church in 40 years, said, "Sure, I'll comment." And I turned around, stunned, wondering what pearls of wisdom would drop from his beautiful mouth. And he bowed his head and he solemnly declared, "It's a very sad day for Catholics everywhere." And I thought, yeah. And as we continued on our walk to the Old Port of Montreal, I turned to him and said, that was kind of obvious, wasn't it? And wouldn't it be great if the next pope were to come up with a progressive policy on contraception that wouldn't disenfranchise millions of impoverished Catholic women around the world who are trapped in a cycle of childbearing and child-rearing? And he said, yes, Shari, that would have been great. Too bad you turned down the interview. And I knew better because I'd actually been the president of Media Watch, as it was then called, for 10 years during the 1990s. I already knew that women's voices were chronically underrepresented in the media, and that one of the reasons for that was that women frequently decline opportunities when they're offered. How many of the women in this room have ever said, no, I'm not the best person to a media interview request? Yeah. That's why I still tell the story. And the reason that it's important is, well, you all know this, but I'm going to reiterate it too. Most of us, most women, spend decades of our lives trying to avoid becoming pregnant, trying to become pregnant, or dealing with the consequences of having been pregnant, which last the rest of our lives. And so it's not surprising that our perspectives on some key issues might differ from our male counterparts. Never mind the fact that we're also more fearful in underground parking lots, we're more likely to end up living in poverty, we're more harshly judged by beauty standards that are unattainable and punishing. So when our voices are not heard, our perspectives are not considered, they're not integrated into public conversations or public policy decisions. Spending does not get allocated to daycare, for example, or all sorts of other things that I'm sure could come to your minds, and that our guests today are going to speak about as well, or do speak about. So, those perspectives, our perspectives, your perspectives are desperately needed in today's world to bridge the gender gap that still has women's perspectives at about 20% overall in op-ed pages and on influential radio and TV talk shows. There are outliers. Public broadcasters are doing a better job than private broadcasters, and people like Kate Hartfield, who you're going to hear from, is actively looking for female perspectives and more diverse voices. So things are changing, and we're helping to make that change. So now I'm going to invite the 5 fabulous panelists to come up to the stage via the stairs as opposed to hopping over the stage, which I was repeatedly doing. Shima Khan, immediately to my left, your right, earned a PhD from Harvard in chemical physics and owns numerous patents on drug delivery technology. She served on the board of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association and is the founder and former chair of the Canadian Council on American Islamic Relations. She writes a monthly column in the Globe and Mail. Rachel Vincent, next to her, is the Director of Media and Communications for Nobel Women's Initiative. She's a former journalist who has worked in Canada, the US, and Mexico. She left journalism to become the head of communications for the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. And for 16 years, Rachel has been advising nonprofits and governments on international and social justice issues, environment, and health. Kate McInturf is a senior researcher at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and past women's human rights campaigner for Amnesty International. She has a PhD from UBC and has taught at American University in Cairo. Her work focuses on making international agreements on women's human rights a reality. Kathleen Monk has a master's degree in politics and communications from the London School of Economics and is a former broadcast producer. She served as communications director to Jack Layton and as the founding executive director of the Broadbent Institute. But you probably recognize her from the Insiders panel on CBC Television's The National, which is where she will be running out to immediately after finishing this event. And finally, last but not least, Kate Hartfield is a columnist and the editorial page is editor of the Ottawa Citizen. She has a master's degree in journalism from Carleton and serves as a volunteer mentor editor with both Informed Opinions and with a U.S. counterpart called the Op-Ed Project. She's also had dozens of her short speculative fiction published in all sorts of magazines. In addition to participating on the panel, Kate's also going to give us a few words at the end, demystifying the process of submitting to her page and getting your uniquely informed opinions published and disseminated to add value to the public discourse. And let me just say, because I've just noted how incredibly skilled and knowledgeable and educated these women are. When I first started writing op-eds 25 years ago, I was a seriously underemployed graduate student who had a background as a shiatsu therapist and a theater student. I was an expert in nothing, but I did have an informed opinion on a few things, and that's what made me start writing op-eds. So don't think that just because these women have PhDs that you're off the hook. So I want to start off with hearing from you. What was your original incentive? Actually, no, I asked you all to come up with a story to start, right? Do we all have a story? No? Who has a story they wanted to start with? Oh, yeah. Kathleen does have many scaries. Okay, I'm going to start with this question then. So what was your original incentive for speaking up? I'm going to start with you, Kate. Oh, we need the mic. Yeah, we'll have to swivel the microphones. This is being videotaped so that the thousands of people who would have liked to have come but weren't available on the night or live in a different city will be able to see the event after the fact.
Is this okay, audio-wise? We're good? Yeah, so I was a graduate student too, and I was in the journalism program at Carleton. And I wanted to be a reporter, but I had never in a million years considered writing opinion. It wasn't on my radar at all. But I was quickly discovering that as a freelancer, you know, beggars can't be choosers. And so when the editor, the woman who held the position that I hold today at the Ottawa Citizen, was looking for young women to write columns, this is a theme, I knew a guy who worked there, and he said, "Do you ever try writing a column?" And so I said, "Sure. You know, if there's a couple $100 in it, I'll do anything." So I tried my hand at opinion writing, and you know, on an ad hoc basis, and eventually got contracts and went from there. So it was I sort of fell backwards into it, but I discovered that I liked it, and I discovered that I was pretty good at it. So here I am. 14 years later.
So your incentive was basically financial.
Yes, it was entirely financial. Yeah. Well, plus, I mean, it didn't take long for me to figure out that there were things I was mad about. I mean, the very first, the very first op-ed I ever wrote was about Our Lady's School in the market. Do people know this building? It's been boarded up for years and years, and it pissed me off that it had been boarded up for years and years, and it still does today because it's still boarded up. So that the use of our heritage in the market was the thing that I was first angry about, and it just sort of went from there.
Maybe what we'll do is detach the microphones, and then we can just pass them. I'm going to pose the second question, and you can answer either the first or second question. The second question is, what resistance did you have to overcome, if any? So we'll go to you. So what was your incentive? And if you don't remember what that was, then you could talk about what resistance.
So I never really wanted to be on camera. My background, as Shari mentioned, was I was a television producer, and similar to Shari and maybe as well to Kate, you know, I was a waitress really who needed a job, who moved to Toronto and couldn't get a job teaching ESL, so somehow ended up working in television under an incredible mentor by the name of Jane Houghton, who is an incredible broadcaster, in fact one of the first women to run and be the news director of Q107 97 in Toronto, which is a very large rock and private radio station. So I tutored under her, and but I didn't ever want to be on camera, but I was mouthy, I was opinionated, and I did fight to have a lot of women on air. So as I moved up through my television producing jobs, I would agitate for more women on Canada AM or on the National or in other venues. And it was helpful that I started in TV with Jane and a full women team of producers. We were all women. So that was helpful. In terms of what I had to overcome when I moved into politics, obviously there was a partisan political party incentive for me to start speaking. I didn't really have a choice. I was pushed. But the story I would just briefly tell, which was really the crossroads, was when I was asked in the summer of 2011 by Peter Mansbridge to take the position on The Insiders, which had traditionally only been 2 males and only 2 parties. And as a New Democrat, I had been long agitating for a breakup of this strictly blue-red panel, and didn't understand why the media continued to return to this narrative and not broaden that. So then all of a sudden I was faced with this double problem of not only being, okay, we'll ante up, it's time for you as a New Democrat to join the panel, and then on top of that, you as a woman to join this panel of 2 men. And I didn't want it. I had 2 very young children at the time. I was struggling as it was with my job, felt the pressure, didn't feel qualified, all the things that run through our minds. But then I started to think about it, and I said, there's no male colleague that I work with that would turn down this offer. And we can talk about tricks and techniques later on, but there were many I used to kind of get through that first walking through those doors of the what I like to call the Peter Mansbridge Cathedral of Lights, which is what it is. It is the most nerve-wracking newsroom in Canada. More so, any like shot box is fine, little studios okay. That is a terrifying place. But anyhow, I'll turn it over to Kate.
You can tell her that I told her not to terrify you, right. Did you?
Just the lights, not him.
Kate.
I feel really Machiavellian compared to you two. Well, I started out writing things that nobody read because I was an academic, and at some point I thought, you know, it might be nice if somebody read something I wrote, which obviously required a certain shift in my writing style. And as I turns out I quite liked having people pay attention to what I had to say, and so it's been just sheer, you know, unbridled ambition and lust for power since then, really.
You do work for the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, so just to put that into context. Nobody's getting rich at your shop.
No. But definitely for me, it's always that tension. I mean, I taught for many years, and so for me, talking to nice people like you in a room is quite comfortable. But I have to say, I don't think I've ever done a television interview where about an hour before it was supposed to happen, I didn't think, you know, I could cancel this. I could just call and say, you know, I'm sick or my child's sick or whatever, and then I wouldn't have to do it. And then I think, yeah, but would they call me next time so I could be sick to my stomach again? And so then I do it. So that for me, that's my tale of unbridled ambition.
Shima was laughing a lot at the academic part, so I think she obviously related. My story's a little bit different. I started my life as an underpaid private radio journalist, and which was great for about 6 years. And then I went into communications. I flipped to the other side. So I've spent the rest of my career amplifying the voices of other people around me. And I'm lucky enough to do it in an organization that I feel passionately about now, and I get to amplify the voices of women, and particularly grassroots women. But there was a pivotal moment where, in which I really saw the difference between being on the side of media with the microphone and putting it in somebody else's face, and then having it shined on me. And it was a pivotal moment. It wasn't the first time I had been on camera, certainly not. And it was certainly not the first time I had been interviewed or written, but it was the first time I had really shared something very personal and about which I felt very passionately. So in 1995, I was assaulted in the United States. I was sexually assaulted. And I was living in Montreal at the time, and I had been a Montreal journalist, so I knew a lot of media in Montreal. So when I came back to Montreal and got over and recovered, I joined the board of the Montreal Assault Prevention Center and got very active with the board. And then I wrote an op-ed about my experience. And it's interesting how media and the people I had worked in media treated me after that. They called me, and of course they wanted to interview me, and there was a little rush of media after that, but they were so profoundly uncomfortable in interviewing me. It was like I had been one of them, and then I was on the other side, and I was talking about something very intimate. But in the years since then, that was 1995, and I work on sexual violence, almost every woman has been touched by the issue. And it's really one of the reasons I work on the issue now. And inevitably, even now, after working on the issue for years, I'll be interviewed by somebody about the subject, and then we'll start chatting afterwards. And it's amazing how many women journalists themselves have been assaulted or have experienced it in their lifetime in another way. So that was the kind of ding, 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 ding moment where I realized that there's real power in also tapping into your own stories and telling them. And I don't do it nearly enough, and none of us do. So,
Thank you.
oh okay.
Well, my incentive, I was a graduate student as well, writing articles that no one read in peer-reviewed journals. But this was at the time of the famous fatwa against Salman Rushdie. And I was in the United States at the time. And there was just so much, of course, discussion about the fatwa, but there was a lot of ignorance about Islam. And people were saying very, very vicious things about the faith itself, which, it's so central to who I am that I just felt the need to speak out. So I wrote my first piece, if you like, for the Harvard Gazette, the first time it had ever been published. I just felt very cathartic, but I didn't know what kind of effect it had. And that's how I started out. And there are two stories I'd like to relate about sort of, one, why it's important, and another with the resistance. I went back to Montreal. I grew up in Montreal, and I went back after my degree. And there was really a very horrific incident in Quebec. I think she was 12 or 11. A young woman had been raped by her stepfather. And the presiding judge had given him a sentence of 2 years less than a day because it was an anal rape. And she had said at the time, the judge, because of his cultural origin, he was North African, he had spared her virginity. And she had taken that into account. And we were outraged. And I had spoken to the media about issues of Islam, and for some reason they came to me. And I was unequivocal that this man should not get off, that there's no excuse for assault, whether it's anal or frontal. And I was very, very clear about that. The next day I went to the bank, and the teller, a gentleman, thanked me because he had seen the interview. And I didn't realize, because you don't know how your words will affect people. Another incident that told me the resistance was, this was 1995. The hijab first came up in Quebec. There was a lot of, still is, brouhaha about, and I had been very vocal about defending the right of women to wear the hijab in Quebec. Our Muslim community, which was very fractious, decided to have unity dinner, and they asked me to be one of the speakers. I accepted. And then there was some backpedaling because some of the organizations, they had a problem with a woman speaking. As someone said to me, don't take it personally. This is what I was told. Oh, well. Don't take it personally. It's not you in particular. It's just you in general. And then I thought, well, you know what? It's about unity. That's the main purpose. It's not about women. I'm going to save that battle for next time. So I said, okay, you know what? No problem. I'll back out. Others found out and said, no, you got to go. And they protested. So the organizing committee came back to me and they said, we found a solution. Please write your speech, and we'll have one of the men read it. And that's when I said, no way. I will take this to the media if you do not let me speak. And this is a promise. And I learned then and there, I will never let my voice be silenced. And I hope all of you will also take that opportunity.
Have we got a really great panel here or what? You know, it's interesting to pull out some of the themes that are already emerging, and I haven't heard almost any of the stories that you've just heard before, although I knew all of these women. So being pushed and encouraged by others, being angry and pissed off about injustice or misinformation, those are common themes. And not necessarily wanting to be in the media in the first place, not wanting the camera trained on you. I hear that from women all over the country. They want to make change. They like people to be talking about the issues they know about. They just don't feel the need to be there doing it themselves front and center. The problem is, if we're not doing it, nobody is. So you all talked a little bit about resistance, things you had to overcome. Anybody want to add to that? No? Okay. Yeah.
When I first was offered the monthly column, Patrick Martin, who was the editor at the time, and Val Ross, I don't know if any of you knew Val Ross, she was wonderful. She was a mentor of mine. They both asked me, they said, how are you in terms of withstanding criticism and possibly hate? And I said, can't be that bad. But of course, you know, in the years, I would get very nasty letters. I still get nasty. And at one point, I almost thought of quitting. But I realized that if you quit, then they win. And that's what kept me going. So I think that's the biggest resistance. And you just got to remember the bigger picture and why you're in it. So.
Absolutely. So first experience, Kate, you talked about your first experience. Others of you have first experience stories. Kathleen's smiling already. Is it a horror story? We need the microphone.
Yep. I'm not sure if I remember my first. And they're all horror stories, and Shari told me I'm not allowed to tell horror stories. No, but they're all also very rewarding. So I will tell a story that perhaps Shari counseled me not to tell, but I'll tell it in a more positive light. And perhaps it's true what she said in advance of the panel, that maybe it's a bit of an outlier story, but I think it speaks to the benefits of doing media, and particularly in hard moments. So, because you never get asked, or maybe it is because of politics.
In politics, you don't get asked
Yeah.
unless it's a hard moment.
In politics, you get asked and you get called up to speak when it's a hard and it's a crucial moment. So whether it was, the 2011 campaign, E-3, and all of a sudden Sun Media breaks a story about...
Sorry, E-3, you might have to translate
election. So the election was happening in 3 days. So it was the end of the campaign. We had gone through 33 days of the campaign. Apparently the orange wave was surging. And then all of a sudden Sun Media breaks a story that happened 16 years ago, about Jack being in a massage parlor. And I'm going to paint a quick picture for you. So you're with the media on the bus, you're having fun, you've taken them all golfing to make them happy, you've shown them where the bar is, they're having a beer, and you're like, I got this. The royal wedding's on, we've got 3 days to the election, everything's going to be okay. Then you get a call, and all of a sudden, there's this massage story. Just heads up. What do you mean heads up? Oh, just heads up. Like, well, are there lines? Like, what's the story? What do you want me to tell people? Like, are they going to scrum me? Just heads up. We don't know when it's breaking. I just want you to be aware. Well, you're telling me, but you're not telling me what to say or how we're messaging it. Anyhow, and you end up being in front of the camera, and you do have to steel yourself. And many women in the room, I see Laura Peck, others, Raylene Langdion, who have had to do this. You have to steel yourself when you're in front of the camera, and feel the strength and root yourself, essentially, and understand that this is the clip that's going to play on the air for the next 24 hours. So it is my job in this moment to deliver it well, to the best of my ability. And it may not be perfect, but I will try my best. And so I delivered, some lines that I made up on the fly that turned out to be okay. But then all of a sudden I morphed into Julie from The Love Boat at the end. Because I delivered my line saying this happened 16 years ago, 8 elections campaigns, it's a smear attempt by the Conservatives. And now, everybody, it's time to get on the bus. We've got a rally to go to, and these things happen to you. You can't always be perfect, but I think it's always difficult, but you do it for whatever cause you believe in or whatever party you're representing I don't know. Was that an okay story? Sure, it's not helpful.
No, that's a helpful story if you're in the political world and are aspiring to be a comms director or press secretary and to be operating in that world. How many of you fit into that category? A few. Okay. The women that the Informed Opinions Project is targeted at are not so much those women, although, there are lots of Laura Peck, for example, and other organizations that provide really great training for that. What we're really looking for, and it's so valuable that you're there doing that, because it's great to see women on political panels. But for those of you who are not in that world and don't aspire to that world, one of the things that I say to the scholars and the nonprofit leaders that we train is you're almost never going to have that kind of experience with the media. So I've been interviewed hundreds of times, and I have some horror stories that I'm not going to tell, because the vast majority of my stories and experiences in the media are about relaying information and adding value in context and making stories and issues illuminated and heard that might not otherwise be.
This is a small example, but since the conversation is how to get your voice in media, I always think of the baby steps. And at Nobel Women's Initiative, we're always thinking of small actions you can take. I think one thing that's really underutilized, and you see it in the letters to the editor, is that women should be starting by getting letters out to editors. You see there are, like, the Ottawa Citizen, or the Globe and Mail too, a couple of guys you see all the time. And I often feel that I should write, all of us as an assignment every week should write 2 or 3 letters to the editor or to some online journal. And I remember when I was in college, and where I first got the bug was I was a history major, a geeky history major, and I was doing census research on boats that had been going from the U.S. to Liberia and Sierra Leone, former slaves who decided to go back to Africa. And it was, obscure academic stuff, but some Washington Post reporter wrote a piece about the Liberian conflict, and I knew that he got part of that story wrong, so I was writing a letter to the editor about it. And it became a featured letter, where they put a big box around it, and I was so proud. Here I was, an undergraduate, I was in the Washington Post. I mean, it was fabulous. And again, I was just an undergraduate. I wasn't an expert, but I knew what I was talking about on that little niche piece. So I think it's really important to find your niche, and it's something I haven't followed myself. I'm a generalist, but if you have, if you have niche specialty, it's important because you do bring that to the table.
Follow up on that. So I wanted to mention that in my remarks afterwards, but since we're talking about it, I was just thinking about this on my way over, because the section that I edit includes op-eds, but it also includes letters to the editor. And the thing with op-eds, especially these days, because newspapers are contracting, and so there's much fewer opportunities than there used to be to get op-eds. They're not none, but for example, I get a couple of hundred submissions every week, and I can take 2 or 3 of those. So there are many women in the audience here who have gotten an email from me saying, "I'm sorry, I just don't have space for this." I'm not lying when I say that. I don't have space for everything I'd like to take. And I have so many considerations other than the gender of the writer, too, that I have to take into account. So it's not just, an op-ed from a woman comes in, I'm going to publish it. That's not how it works. That's part of the reason why, the sort of structural reasons why getting an op-ed in can be a bit tricky. But last week I was filling in for my letters editor who's on vacation. And I was putting together the Saturday Letters page, and it was 100% male. Because I had no other publishable letters in my inbox. Those were the letters that I had, and they were all from men. I think it's maybe not as glamorous, and you don't really get the sort of ego pop that you get from writing an op-ed, and you also don't get any money. But letters to the editor have a much higher rate of success when you submit them. And so if you're looking, and I think the stakes are a bit lower too. So I think if you're looking to break in and you want to have something shorter and more focused and not an entire big op-ed piece with thesis and arguments and the whole bit. If you just want to say something short in 200 words and you can write well, we'll love it.
Yeah, just briefly, I spent 10 years writing letters to the editor before I got my first op-ed published. And there are many advantages to that. I learned how to write well, because you have to really focus your arguments in about 150 words or less. And I learned how to write by doing that. The second thing is, especially in today's age of online commentary, you can write your letter to the editor and you will have no backlash, because there are no comments to the letters to the editor. So it's a good way to start, to get your confidence, to see your name. I mean, it's a very good first step, and it'll help you in your writing.
And the letters to the editor's page is surprisingly well read.
It is.
Yeah. So, Kathleen, you already talked about your role model, Jane Houghton, and the force behind you and that encouragement. Did others of you have role models who were really inspirational to you, or took your hand, encouraged you, showed you ropes?
I mentioned briefly Patrick Martin, who now is the Middle East correspondent for the Globe and Mail. He was the op-ed editor. And Val Ross was the deputy op-ed, and they were both very, very supportive, encouraging, and I think without their help and mentorship, I wouldn't be where I am now. So. And today, Natasha Hassan, she's very, very supportive as well. So.
Okay. And also just role models, other women who you see out there doing stuff that made you think, yeah, I could do that.
Yeah, I think for me, role models, it's oddly enough, it's hearing, for example, Madeleine Albright in an interview talk about how, so a former U.S. Secretary of State, how the first time she went to the UN Security Council, she had to kind of say to herself, if I don't speak up because I feel intimidated, then the U.S. position doesn't get heard. Yeah. And I thought, oh my goodness, that someone who I think of as tremendously powerful and I mean, she's very, connected to the heads of states and all of that, and that she had to give herself that pep talk, to me was really inspirational, because I thought, oh, well, okay. I think it gets past that sense of like all these other people totally have it down and it's really easy for them and they never have a moment. When you realize that everyone has a moment sometimes, it helps. For me, it really helps. And the other person I have to say I just really admire is Gwen Ifill. She's a U.S. broadcaster, and she's just so calm and so she's able to. She does, kind of the U.S. version of like Powered Politics, the Washington Week in Review, and so it's it can get fairly partisan, and she's so cool. And I just think whenever I get nervous on screen, I just like channel Gwen. Just like channel. She's just got this whole thing going where she doesn't get ruffled. And when someone tries to like kind of talk to her about her, sort of get her to talk about her personal life or kind of diminish her in some ways, and you see this with women too. Sometimes they'll, tell us about your kids. It's like, I'm not here to talk about my kids. I'm here to talk about the public policy on job creation. And she just gives them the smackdown, like really just boom, that's it, not going there. And I think watching someone like that is really inspiring for me, and makes me feel like it's possible. Kate.
I could sit here all day mentioning people, but I think early on I talked about how I got my first gig at The Citizen, and that was Tina Spencer was the editor of the editorial pages at the time. She's now our politics editor, and she was the one who was working to try and diversify the opinion on the page. And I mean, this is an ongoing problem. Across North America with newspapers, is the lack of diversity in opinion writing. It's not just gender. But some editors think that's their problem and some of them don't. And Tina very much was an editor who thought it was her problem, and that's why I'm here today. She famously said that she was looking for a young woman with a nose ring who lived in the market, and I fit all those categories, but my nose ring had recently fallen out and healed over. No word of a lie. But other than that, I fit to a T. So yeah. And the other person I want to mention is Andrew Potter, who's my boss, who's the editor of the Ottawa Citizen, and in his quiet way is 100% supportive of everything I do in this regard, and is 100% supportive of diversifying our pages as well, and very aware of that. As I was coming here today, I sent out an email to everybody saying, I'm going to be leaving early. I'm going to go do my, ladies with opinions thing. And I actually said that in the email. And Andrew saw me going out the door later, and he said, "Go ladies." So yeah, so I think those, there are a lot of people who care about this, who are maybe not doing the panels and not out there talking about it all the time, but there are a lot of sort of silent supporters that all of us women have, and people, like my partner who holds my hand when I get particularly nasty hate mail. So there are all those people behind all of us, I think.
So I'm now interested in having you turn your thoughts to personal benefits that you have realized as a result of having a public profile, of having a public voice. And Kathleen, I think you acknowledged that that had been so for you. While you're reminding yourself of your story, I'll just say that since I started writing op-eds 25 years ago, every significant career opportunity I've had in all those years has come about in part as a result of having had a public voice. Kathleen.
And this is another lesson that you can get from doing media, that sometimes, even though you get the questions in advance and you confer on which questions you want to talk about, it's very often the interviewer will throw a question that you didn't want to talk about at you.
I
This is an example of that.
I have Kathleen written right there.
No, that's okay.
Okay,
but I can happily talk about it.
You can pass.
So that's the thing when you're in politics and you're a communication person, you're supposed to be talking about anything, right? So no, I think that obviously there's been benefits from doing more media. I think the greatest benefit, people who have corporate positions, which I haven't had in terms of running their own business, benefit a lot from it being a business development tool. For me, it's certainly been a way where I've received invitations to do public speaking events, which has been fun. But I think the most rewarding part, or the benefit that I have felt, was similar to the experience you had in the bank with the bank teller, where it's those individuals that come up to you or slip you notes at convention, or when you're at, in these weird places, the airport or the dry cleaners, or getting groceries with your 2 children, and they say, good, go get them, Kathleen, we're behind you, thank you for doing what you're doing every day, we appreciate your work. I think that, to me, is the greatest benefit.
Mm-hmm. And
yeah, just to add to that, I mean, that's always wonderful too. That's one of the things that keeps me at it, for sure, because I have many moments when I want to stop. And when you get the email, Rachel, I had a similar experience where I had written a column not too long ago, and I mentioned my own sexual assault in it, and I didn't write about it at any length, but just mentioning it, I got so many emails from women saying, Thank you for saying it. Thank you for writing about this at all. And so many of my colleagues, I think, especially, about 7 or 8 months ago, there was this sort of flurry of women speaking out about this. And so many of my colleagues did. And they all got, hundreds and hundreds of emails from women saying, thank you for saying this. So I think that's worth the price of it right there.
Sally Armstrong's book, how many of you, did I mention this already? Sally Armstrong wrote a book a year or so ago called Ascent of Women. And one of the key messages in her book is, if you can't talk about it, you can't change it. And I think we certainly saw that with the Jian Ghomeshi and the precipitating, the conversations that precipitated. And so when those of you are willing to come forward and speak about personal experiences, it does have a profound impact. Kate.
Yeah, I also want to say, I work on the issues of gender inequality, and call me a cynic, but I don't think people just give up power. They're like, oh, sorry, we were oppressing you. Okay, we're out of here. And And so for me, it means being in, I feel like if I'm not out there in public and I'm not pushing this, then the people who have power don't think there's any constituency for this issue. And so in a very strategic way, I passed 40, and so now I just think I'm right all the time, right? So
Once you're past 50, you are right all the time.
good. So, I have policy positions, which I have done research and thought about, but also I just think are correct, right? And I want people to adopt them. And so I want people to do what I think they should do to make women's lives better. And I've had, many 40 plus years of experience of seeing what happens when that doesn't happen and seeing the cost of inequality on women's lives. And so it's clear that you can't just go, yes, you have to go up to the Hill and have nice conversations with people who are very polite to you, but you also have to be out there in the public saying, no, this is an important issue. And you should also go have a conversation with your MP, or let's watch the polling on what women are voting for now that we talk about this. And so for me, that's been very rewarding because it does kind of work. When I finally freaking got myself on Power and Politics, I was so excited. Did like a little dance down the office hallway. But people treat you differently when you've got that kind of public profile, however tiny mine is, but it does make a difference, and it allows you to push forward the things that you really care about and get people who have power to use it in the way that they need to use it because you know better.
That was certainly my experience, is that it was easier to get my telephone calls returned. It was easier to get people to give money to the causes that I believed in, and it was easier to get change made in the direction that I wanted when I had a public profile.
Yeah, I just briefly add. There have been many benefits. Doors opening. I had an offer from a publisher to publish. I was invited by our conservative government to go to the Middle East to speak on behalf of Canada. But I think the biggest benefit over the 13, 14 years have been the numerous letters that have come in and have challenged my views, and that has made me grow, and has made me question myself, and made me realize that perhaps my way of thinking wasn't totally correct. So I've benefited, I think, spiritually, as well as expanding my faith, my view of the world through the exchanges that come.
Can I just add something? I was going to say, instead of the personal benefit, because I work more on pitching interviews to media, I work with a lot of grassroots activists, and one of the benefits is seeing these women actually get on TV or get into an op-ed, get their op-ed published. And sometimes you have to use kind of devious means. I work for 6 Nobel Peace Laureates, and so we use them as the sweet deal. They're the front people, and then that gets us in the door. And one time I pitched an interview to CTV on sexual violence in Burma, an issue that Kate has helped us with, and so they wanted Jody Williams, the Nobel Peace Laureate from the United States, to come and talk about sexual violence against women in Burma. And I was like, yes, but she's not Burmese. Wouldn't it be great to have the Burmese woman talk about sexual violence in Burma? She's the one who has firsthand experience of what's happening on the ground. So they, to their credit, finally agreed. And so it was Jody and the woman from Burma, and she kicked butt. She was so good. And it was a great interview. And I have to say, moments like this, I just think I go home high. It's so great when you can open the door a crack and then push it wide open. It's so much fun. Yeah. So,
any other reflections on that? I'll move on. And by the way, I have a couple of more questions, and then we're going to open it up. So you should be preparing your questions now. What I know from attending many, many public events is that in this, we're not going to have this problem in this room, but men are always the first ones up to the microphone. And I've actually read science that suggests women take longer to make the connections, because our brains are so much more complicated, and to formulate the genuine question as opposed to just hearing ourselves pontificate. And so you have to give women longer warning, just like me with my comments on the Pope. It took me a while to, come up with my brilliant comment. And that's why David got on the national news. sad day, and I did not. So I'm just warning you now, your turn is coming. So this question was really, some of you have already answered it, but it's around what kind of impact have you been able to have on a larger level because of your profile in the media, or because of your ability to get other stories into the news? So policies changed or conversations started.
One thing that I think is helpful for me is to frame the expectations in a realistic way when you're writing an op-ed. I mean, it hasn't been my experience that, you know, you'll write that persuasive piece and the government realizes it's been wrong and changes its policy. I mean, it just doesn't work that way for the most part. But it's more, it doesn't mean that it doesn't matter. It's just, I think if you have that in your head as definition of success, you'll be depressed because it's not going to happen. You know, I've been writing opinion pieces for 14, 15 years, and it's, I think, never happened that, you know, I've single-handedly changed a policy or anything like that. But what does happen is that you get to set the agenda. You know, you put a piece on the agenda. You get to frame it in a particular way. You get to make some people think about it in a way that they hadn't. And possibly, if you are wrong yourself, you in that John Stuart Mill kind of way, you get that wrong opinion out there, and others can counter it, and we all benefit. You know, so I think that's the benefit from it. And there are certainly, there are certainly issues that I've seen gather momentum in the national discourse that would not have happened if we hadn't been writing about it. We were just talking about, you know, sexual assault and harassment on the Hill. You know, that would not have been a conversation if women hadn't put their hands up and said, look, I want to talk about this.
Kate?
Yeah, I think I agree with Kate's experience also that there's not like the big heroic moment. I mean, I used to joke about how, you know, my fantasy life, I'm James Bond, and I just like swoop in, and there are like no committee meetings, and we just get stuff done. But it's really that kind of constantly bringing an issue up, framing the way you want this to be discussed. So we're not going to talk about what the victim was wearing. We're going to talk about perpetration. We're going to talk about safety. It's just slowly making sure that your voice is one of many voices that is shifting the way the conversation is happening. And what that does is it opens up new possibilities. I mean, especially, I have to say, this last year has been really something, having worked on issues around violence against women for many years. It's been a very different conversation. And that didn't happen because one person did one interview. It happened because of, 10, 15, 20 years of people saying again and again and again, it doesn't matter what she was wearing, and so on. And then finally, there's kind of a moment where that somebody actually hears you say that. It sinks in, and people start behaving differently. And so it's not the big heroic moment, but it's all of the voices repeating and changing the conversation by being part of it.
Me? Oh, Rachel?
No, go ahead.
I think there were two instances. This is, all of you remember the horrific Shafia trial of the 4 women who were killed. I knew that the trial was coming up, and I was part of a discussion group of Muslim leaders based in Toronto. And I put it out there, this is going to be in the media. It's going to be there every day. We're going to look terrible as a community. What are we going to do about it? And there was the usual group that said, do nothing. Another group that said, media conspiracy. But there was a core that understood. And we had some really good conversations, and quite a few projects came out of that. One was the first ever white ribbon campaign by Muslim men, which was a milestone. But I wrote about it in the Globe and Mail, and I wanted to tie it to a very successful anti-gang violence program in Chicago, initially called Ceasefire, now called Cure Violence. And I saw the connections between reducing gang violence and reducing honor crime. And I put it out there just hoping some federal government would pick it up. Someone, no one did, but no government department did, but I did find a few interested people, and actually someone from Department of Justice came calling, and we were able to actually put something together. So that was good. And the second thing was last year I put out the idea, which angered my community to no end. There's some institutions in our community, not all, they're minority, but who don't believe women should be on their boards. And so I put the idea out there, well, we should strip charitable tax status from those institutions that refuse to allow women on their boards. I explained, do that if you want. Don't let women on your boards, but don't expect the Canadian taxpayer to support your practice. And a couple of the institutions in our city have changed for fear of something actually coming down the pipeline. So, I mean, I didn't think it would happen, but you never know. So.
Well, it's really hard to beat that. But I was going to say that I think collectively there's a lot of issues that you see the marker being moved on. Climate change, I think that more and more women in being involved on conversations on climate change has really changed over the 20 years since I worked for an environmental commission in Montreal, changed the conversation about climate change and changed a lot of issues. So I often am asked in international situations, why do women's voices matter? And I give them the example of peace processes. If you look at peace processes to end conflict around the world, the classic peace process is where the government and the rebel forces sit down at a table, and the very same men with guns who caused the war are supposedly charged with ending the war. It's a bad model. It doesn't work. There are places like Colombia where they're trying to shake up that model a bit and move us forward to something that makes more sense. But studies, research done by women like Kate, have shown that peace processes that include women's voices, and when women in media are included in that, when I say not just women's voices at the peace table, but women talking about peace processes and what communities need, like health and education, it really makes a difference. So the research really backs that having women involved makes a difference. And it's starting to globally. We're seeing a bit of difference, and we're starting to see some recognition that there's real value, that this is not just a question of equity or affirmative action, that there's a concrete and solid reason that 52% of the world's population be included in these sorts of processes.
There's another duh moment. This is a perfect entree to a point that I want to make. One of the challenges Informed Opinions has had since we started was how to make clear to the people we want to give us money and support the project that women's voices genuinely make a difference. And so the example that Rachel just gave is a really profound one. Let me talk about the media specifically. We took the first 100 commentaries that were written by women we had trained and created a word cloud to see what issues came up most often when women were writing. And the women who were writing the op-eds were economists and legal experts and environmentalists and NGO leaders. They were across many different disciplines. So we came up with the word cloud. This is it. And then people said to us, well, you know, that's only useful insofar as you can compare it to what men are writing about. So we went back and we took 100 op-eds written by men in the same newspapers in the same period of time, created another word cloud, and then we subtracted all the common words from the two word clouds. And we pulled out only the words that were only prominent in op-eds written by women. Here they are. Abuse, access, assault, benefit, care, children, cuts, discrimination, education, equality, families, future, girls, help, justice, national need, people policy, research, response, school, services, sexual, society, story, strategy, students, support, treatment, violence, women. So those are the issues, among the issues that are missing when women's voices are missing. Informed Opinions delivers workshops. We have tons of resources that are available on our website for free. We offer editing support and feedback once you've taken one of our workshops. If you want to buff and polish your piece before you submit it to Kate or Natasha Hassan or others. Excuse me. We're also building a database of women experts populated by the women we train and others who are knowledgeable enough in their fields that they're willing to say yes when the media call. I will say yes to the interviews. And so now what I'd like to hear from the rest of the panelists is what else could and should we be doing collectively or individually to increase women's voices in the media?
Well, I have the microphone and I'll start. And I have fabulous young colleagues here from Nobel Women's Initiative. We have a volunteer activist program, and I consulted them about what they thought too. So we made a little list. How to encourage women to speak up. One thing that really came up was something we discussed earlier, which is mentorship, the importance of mentorship. And I feel like I sort of floundered for many years in my career, and listening to others talk about who mentored them, it's really an important ingredient. And you see it commonly that people who are mentored early and well really go much farther. So that's important, particularly for young women. So we're all at the age now where that's a really great way to pass on knowledge. Find your niche and build an expertise and let people know about it. A young colleague who came to us as a volunteer activist had been blogging. She had had finished her MA program and started blogging about sexual violence and conflict. And because we were looking for somebody to work on that issue, that's how we ended up hiring her. And she really had built up a following and an expertise on sexual violence and conflict, not just because of her academic training, but because she was interacting every day through a blog. So I think blogging is a great way to do it. And get your voice out there, because sometimes if you can't get your voice into existing traditional media, blogging is a great way to, as sometimes blogs become so popular, then people are then invited to then become guest op-ed writers, etc. And also to look at social media and to develop your voice through social media, not just as a social networking tool, but as a voice to develop your own sense of voice, and also as a way to put your views out there. Use it as an activist tool. It's cheap, it's free, and you can do it right away.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything, and I love that you actually asked women what they wanted. That's so revolutionary. Go. And I would also add to the mentorship piece that, there's something, actually, it's a term that I learned from working on sexual violence and conflict, which is accompaniment. Or another way of putting it is the buddy system. Mm-hmm. And what I found in working with women who, I didn't even realize this is, my own story of how big my head is and how much I'm in my bubble. I'd worked for a national women's organization, and I worked at the national and international level, and I was organizing this local event here in Ottawa, this International Women's Day event, and it came out after working on this for 5 years with the same people, that some of the women who worked for local organizations felt intimidated by the people who worked for national organizations. Now, this had never occurred to me, but what that really showed me was that, actually sometimes what you need to do is just go with people. You don't even, or say, hey, I've got an interview tonight in the Cathedral of Peter Man's Bridge. Do you want to just come? They'll let you sit in the green room. Just come and see. It's not magical. It's not, well, okay, maybe a little bit with Peter, but, or, here's how you pitch a story. Help me write the email to this news producer. And I find it is kind of mentorship, but it's also just just come with me and I'll show you. The first time I went to an MP's office, I was petrified. I had no idea. Security freaked me out. I didn't know. And I think just having someone who's done it before stand next to you and just walk you through it is huge. And anyone can do that. And, you can do it with anyone. You don't necessarily have to be working on exactly the same issue. Sometimes it's just here's what happens in a news studio, or here's what an editor looks like. That's can be really, really helpful. Yeah, I don't know what that is, actually. You tell me what a double is.
It's a form of an interview. But that's I pick up on Kate and Rachel's point precisely. That the network is really important, to have other women
who are doing what you do and rely on one another to give each other feedback. So I, for instance, spent a good part of my day yesterday giving feedback to a female colleague of mine, a former colleague of mine, because she had done a series of interviews. And so I took the time to listen to all of her interviews and sent her a bunch of notes. And I did that because I know she would do the same thing for me. I think mentoring, as Kate just said, is incredibly important. I also mentoring and demystifying. In my role as DCOM, I used to bring all of my press secretaries into the CTV News studio just to show them how a story is made, and this is how they edit pieces for the National for Lloyd. And I know that because I used to do this and demystify the process. But even now, to let women bring young women into, as Kate said, when I'm doing interviews and show them how it's done. But I think the network, like in politics, so it's not dissimilar. Getting women to do more media is not dissimilar to how we try to recruit more women into politics. And I work on a bit of both of those issues, and showing them, supporting them. The training is really, really important. Everyone should go back to school, even people who have been doing it for a long time, to learn more techniques, how to improve, particularly when it comes to media. You can always improve your performance. Probably Kate would say you always can improve your writing, and certainly your broadcast. By having that feedback, it's really helpful. So, and I'm going to give you all a little tip that I give all of my clients or all of my friends or anyone who asks. This is what's called Rescue Remedy. If this is a brand plug, oh no, I shouldn't do that. Anyhow, it is homeopathic, and it is a little spray that if you get nervous, it'll calm you down. So just throw it in your purse. Take 2 little pumps before you go on air. It might be psychological. My sister calls it my booze spray. But whatever it is helpful. And try it because it may work. Some people use breathing techniques, I'm sure, particularly for broadcast. They say, can you hold this for a second? If you stand like this and breathe and look really big for a while, when you go in and sit in the studio, you'll feel more confident. They say stand like that for 5 minutes. There's all these.
It's actually only 2 minutes,
Oh, yeah.
and
There you go.
Amy Cuddy has a TED Talk on the subject that's
Exactly.
really worth watching.
I've seriously done that in a bathroom stall.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Just speaking of, going back to the sort of personal doors that open when you write op-eds and that sort of thing, this reminds me that one of the sort of unexpected things that happens when you write an op-ed is you do get asked for broadcast interviews quite a bit, so you may think, well, I'm not interested in broadcast, I want to do writing, or vice versa, but you'll often find that there's quite a bit of overlap.
One of the things, when we partner a lot with universities, and one of the ways that I convince universities to have me come in and do workshops for female scholars is to say, recognizing there are limited opportunities to write op-eds or place op-eds, I say, really, op-eds are the gateway drug to media engagement. Because once a woman has, in fact, taken her anger and crafted 700 words and polished them and submitted them and gotten them published, and she's framed the argument in the way that she wanted, and she's gotten to choose every word and reflect, then when CBC or CTV calls and says, great op-ed, would you come on and talk about that? She's much more willing to say, well, yeah, who else are they going to get to talk about that? I wrote the damn thing, so yes, I will talk about it.
Yeah, and it's, and it's not always the things you would expect, like it's not always sort of high expertise, formal expertise kinds of things. I mean, often the sort of quirky personal things are the ones that will get broadcast interest. And the other thing I just wanted to amplify is on social media, I happened to be in a Twitter workshop earlier, and was learning about how difficult the gender analytics are for Twitter, because women on Twitter obscure their gender. They choose pseudonyms and other names and that kind of thing, especially when it comes to political conversations. So you get these analytics that seem to show that political conversations are 80% men, because nobody knows what these other handles are, which is sad, because it means that women are afraid to speak out on social media for all kinds of very justifiable reasons. But that got me thinking too. I think one of the ways that we can encourage each other is to amplify each other on social media. And when you read something by a woman that you like, post it on Facebook, post it on Reddit, wherever, Tumblr, wherever you happen to be. And I think the more women see other women writing, the more of a safe activity it becomes, and the more we get this idea that, oh, that is something we can do.
Similarly, the more women we see on television who don't have the shellacked hair and the 2 inches of makeup, the more Chantal Héberts we have, the easier it becomes for any woman to go on TV if without makeup and without doing all of that to look like a TV anchor. I'm going to turn it over now to the audience and invite you to ask questions of your own. Yeah, Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura Peck, and considering the huge cutbacks in every newsroom that you could possibly imagine right across the board, I wonder if any of you would like to speak to how do you, news people are busy and they have so many restrictions now, time, money, effort. How do you get in there? And then I want to also thank you because it's like this is like a form of therapy for me. It's true. It's just I can be so stressed. I come in, I listen to all of this, and wow, my stress has completely gone away. Thank you for that. So anyway, I'm so empathetic for what it used to be in a newsroom, and now they just don't have the resources anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that. Since I've got the mic, and I'll pass it along. There's sort of two avenues that occurred to me right away. One of them is keying what you're doing more to what the newspapers are now focusing on. It's true we have contracted in every possible way from staff, money, space in the newspaper. Everything's contracted. What that means is that we are focusing on the things that we do that no other newspaper does. And this is true of almost every newspaper. So, for example, at the Ottawa Citizen, we focus a lot more on Ottawa news, and that includes politics. Then we used to do a lot more world news and that sort of thing, and that's not what we do anymore. So, I think being aware of what newspapers see as their core mandate and playing to that is one way to get in. Another way is, especially if you're pitching opinion pieces. This is sort of my thing I say over and over again, but what you really want to do is have a clear, provocative thesis that nobody else has said before. If you have a thesis that's true and provable, but it's motherhood and apple pie and everybody agrees with it, I'm not going to take that op-ed because why would I, my goal is to have somebody pick up the paper over breakfast and hand it to their partner and saying, you're not going to believe what I just read. It's so brilliant. Or you're not going to believe what I just read. This is crazy, right? So I mean, one or the other. But nobody's going to do that if it's something that's kind of, poverty is bad. We all agree poverty is bad. Give me something more, right? So that's being provocative, but not for the sake of, not to the point of being offensive, but being thought-provoking, being new and different, being very, very clear and focused and short, and really focusing on the core mandate of the audience that you're going for is important. The other avenue is to just realize that while traditional media have contracted, we are the media. There's a million ways you can go about getting the message out that are not us. The Huffington Post takes a lot of stuff. You can just make your own media world on Tumblr or wherever it is. You're not going to get that instant audience that you would get with a newspaper op-ed, but there are different ways of going about it and going around, and there are podcasts and all kinds of things. So I would say sort of a two-pronged approach of focus very narrowly when you're talking traditional and realize that the world is bigger than traditional media.
Other questions? Comments? Yes, Ursula.
So I just want to pick up on that issue a little bit, and Shari, you mentioned, you've got to channel your anger, and so the question I guess is the issue of tone, in an op-ed, and certainly in my career and helping others write and in writing myself, it's almost that you have to become more provocative or controversial than you really are when you want to express an opinion. And so how far do you feel that women have to stretch themselves? And maybe that's some of the challenges in terms of, it's not pushing beyond the boundaries, it's pushing on beyond one's own self in terms of how one expresses oneself. Do you, in terms of the experiences you've had, do you feel that you've had to write almost more aggressively than you normally would in speaking, or are you able to balance that?
Personally, I'm just that angry. And to be fair, I I have worked most of my career as a self-employed person or as an activist, and so I don't have the same challenges that somebody like you would have at an institution like Shirk, where, you know, there's a way of approaching things that you have to be protective of your job and reputation. So, Kate.
Yeah. I mean, what's been really rewarding for me and also terrifying is what I've increasingly done is I'm very comfortable talking in public about my personal life or personal experiences, so I tend not to do that. But what I have shared, and increasingly so, are, you know, failures or problems that I haven't been able to resolve, gaps in the research, or a public policy problem that I don't see a good answer to. And that, I think the sincerity of that, I found people respond very much to that, even though it feels like kind of showing my like underbelly to the world. It actually has had very positive responses. And sometimes people say, yeah, you did really mess that up. And it's like, well, yeah, okay, kick me while I'm down. But on the other hand, you know, I get much more on the side of, that was so honest. And then people really do listen to you a little bit more, I find. So for me, it's been less about being controversial and more about just being a lot more intellectually and strategically and politically honest about, you know, like I will say, I mean, I've written reports about, you know, how expensive violence against women is in terms of its economic costs and blah, blah, blah. But I will say, look, I don't care if it costs 3 times our gross domestic product. I think we should end violence against women. And when you say something like that, which is clearly off your own message, but people still kind of, they respond to the sincerity of that. And I found, I don't know, it's worked for me. I don't know how shareable that is as a strategy, but.
Yeah, one short thing where I said earlier. But I mean, in terms of being, you know, provocative too, maybe that's not even the right word. But I mean, often what I'm looking for is just something different. You know, so one example that springs to my mind is a couple of weeks ago, I got a submission from a guy who wanted to write about zipper merging. So this perennial question of, do you drive as far as you can in the merging lane and then merge, or do you immediately merge because that's Canadian and polite, right? And as soon as I read this op-ed, I thought, that is going viral, and people are going to talk about that at the breakfast table, right? Because everybody has an opinion on when you should merge. And so I immediately published that op-ed, and you know, I was right. It was the top of our website for days. And so, I mean, so I don't necessarily mean provocative in the sense of being very aggressive or being angry, but it's just a twist on the world that you don't see all the time, you know? And so often our sincerely held beliefs might just be so broadly held or so widely talked about that they're not going to make an editor sit up when they have not a lot of space. But if it's something unusual like that, or even a big broad topic that you can find that personal spin on, or that personal anecdote that makes it different, and that's what will make us sit up a little bit.
Just briefly. One of the writers that I admired, even though I differ from her perspective almost 180, is Margaret Wente. I know, his gasps. You know, I like her style of writing because it is very succinct, and it is to the point, and it you know, it just, you know, gets you right there. And I've learned from that. And I don't use the same approach, but I've learned to sort of try to get the maximum out in the minimum amount of words. And the last column, for example, I want to express the fact that in the upcoming election, as Muslims, we feel very vulnerable. So I thought of, we are the low-hanging fruit in the politics of fear. You know, this is something, I mean, but this is something I've picked up. And so you can be provocative without being nasty, I think. It's an evolution.
I also find humor really useful as a tool to engage readers and op-ed page editors. So I'm not actually always angry in my writing at all, but I do think style and using humor and telling human stories engages people in a way that presenting just the facts in a dry academic way is not going to fly. And so that's a pretty key thing we emphasize in the workshops, is how to take knowledge that is in-depth and important and figure out a way to make it accessible and engaging to people who don't already know that they ought to be concerned about the issues that you're writing about. Somebody at the back had a question. Yes.
So I have a bit of a confession to make, actually, and I think this is probably the best place to do this.
Go ahead.
To out myself, but
Yeah.
So I have said yes to every media opportunity in the last year.
Good.
Because I thought, why not? I have something to say. I should just say it. And so I've spoken on my area of expertise, but I've also spoken on things I know nothing about, like. You know, Boy Scouts. I don't know. It's so, and I've learned a lot, and it's been wonderful. It's been a wonderful experience, and I hope to continue and build on that. But one thing I think a lot about is the amount of time I spend preparing.
Is it getting easier? Because it should be getting faster. The more you do it, the more you realize where you need to invest your time. If you just come up with that one great soundbite per issue or 3 key messages per issue, I don't know. I mean, if the forum's an hour long, is it an hour long televised?
It's
Radio. Oh, radio. Radio's wonderful. What you do with radio, what I do with radio, is I take a blank piece of paper like this, no lines on it, and I do a mind map on one sheet of paper. So you're not going to get any of this as you're rustling through the 10 sheets that you have of linear notes. Don't do that. But if it's radio, one mind map with key data points, stats, little pictures that remind you of the story or the anecdote that you want to take, that's often the best way to prepare for radio. And the very process of creating the mind map cements the ideas or the stories in your brain in the first place. That would be my strategy. Others?
There's 2 journalists in the States. I'm going to forget their names right now, but no, you know Caddy Kelly, BBC, Caddy Kelly, and the ABC reporter just recently wrote an article, a book, and then part of it was published in the Atlantic that was called The Imposter Syndrome. Right. I haven't read the book, I confess, because I have small children and I only read newspapers these days and scan things and Twitter. But the thesis is that, women prepare too much and we always think that we're the imposters. And they tell this great story about even Angela Merkel, who over prepares for every meeting. And you're like, you're Angela Merkel, you're saving Europe right now. And you over prepare and she over prepares.
Well, that could be why she's saving Europe.
Maybe it is. And you could make that case, but I also over prepare. So my friend, I don't have tons of advice for you, except that I know that my male colleagues on the panel, do not over-prepare. And more than that, sometimes they have a cast of thousands of employees that actually do a lot of their prep for them. So I am trying to be more like them. I am trying to reduce the amount of time that I prep going into these panels, but I also think it pays off, both the prep in advance and also the review. In fact, I would say the review is at times even more important than the advance, so how you can improve for the next time. But, because when you review, you realize, wow, I only said 3 really, zingers in that one panel. So that's probably all you need to prepare for the next time. And you get better at editing. Actually, it's not that different than the story that was just told about Margaret Wente, in the sense that you just, editing down, being economical with your words. It's actually, it's a good practice to get into.
To just add, we haven't talked about this because people don't usually, but in media, generally speaking, if you ask for money, sometimes you get it, and I do think that we should learn to realize that all of this work does have value that we do. I'm trying to change that structure at the Citizen, where unless you're writing on behalf of an organization or through a think tank or something like that, generally speaking, I will offer money. But if I forget, tell me, remind me. And with broadcast as well, it really depends on the organization and everything else. But if you're not getting paid or you're not getting paid enough, then I think it's perfectly fair to ask about that. And then you can make the decision whether it's worthwhile to do it on a volunteer basis after that. But nobody's ever going to, blacklist you because you raised the issue.
So we have a couple of other questions there, and Peggy, so I'll start with Peggy and then come to you.
I wanted to have Shari to tell a story she told me recently. I hope it's not one of your forbidden stories.
Uh-oh.
Because I think it shows some of the nuance to do with getting women to appear on TV or especially. And I forget who the host was, probably, I think it was TVO. And he was complaining that he tried to get women, but they would say, well, I don't have childcare, I didn't get my hair done. And you engaged with him in a way, I think, that explained why women have to think about things like getting their hair done when they appear on television. Maybe you could
So the story, some of you probably followed this. It was a year ago now. Steve Paikin had blogged, "Where oh where are all the women?" and he was lamenting how difficult it is for TVO, which in fact does a much better job than almost every other show in the country at getting lots of female guests. But in his blog, he was a little bit flippant, and he made the comments that Peggy just shared, that women use their children as an excuse, was the unfortunate language that he said. And then he talked about the fact that, if they have an inch of regrowth and they dye their hair, they don't want to go on television. So I blogged in response to his blog, and many, many, many other women on Twitter smacked him down and said hello. And so he did a follow-up show. He had actually already had me on the show and done a show the year before about the underrepresentation of women and why women decline to go on television or to respond. So he did a follow-up show, and to his and TVO's credit, they invited on 6 of us who had pushed back and said, "Excuse me?" And so he devoted a whole hour to the topic where he sat there and we all barraged him with, reasons why he was wrong. So like Shima, he's willing to accept that criticism and grow. And TVO, the agenda's numbers right now, I wrote another recent blog about this because I saw Steve at an event in Toronto a month ago, and he told me that they had gotten up to, I think their average now is 45% female voices on their show, which is twice as high as most other, certainly private broadcaster programs in the country. And so what they're demonstrating is that it is possible, and what Informed Opinions is attempting to do is to demonstrate to journalists that, yes, the women are there, they're present, they're willing to go on if you are remotely supportive and, invite them when they know what they're talking about and give them time, they will come on. So 2020, Amanda, wherever you are, I think it's doable for us to bridge the gender gap in Canadian public discourse in the next 5 years, but it takes everybody's participation. So you had a question, yeah. Yeah, so Rachel's going to comment, and I'll just say that I worked as the press secretary to a provincial premier for a year. I didn't write a single op-ed or do any interviews that year as myself. So there are some jobs and circumstances where your employer is not going to be okay with you having a public voice, and that's something that you need to have the conversation with your employer about what are the boundaries for them.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because I've been a spokesperson for several different organizations, and it really depends on the organization. So if you decide to get out there and express personal opinions through opinion editorial writing or whatever, it's a good idea to give them a heads up. And I did have one instance where during the Maha or our business, I wrote a letter to the editor that actually ended up featuring my photo and everything. I was really busy because I was a media person for this organization, and so I had them come to my office to take the picture. And the CEO for whom I was speech writing recognized that the picture was taken in the organization. And she wasn't okay with that, and she's right. I should have cleared that, but I was, getting it off my to-do list. It was I didn't want to leave the office and take 2 hours to go home. But you really have to be clear. And she was okay with me writing the letter, the organization, but not with using office premises, which was completely valid point. So now I'm very, very careful. Anyway, did anybody else want to add anything or say anything?
I can speak to the expertise part of it. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a fuzzy area, the whole expertise thing. Definitely with op-eds, I think we editors are looking for some reason why this person and not some other person. With letters to the editor, we don't ask, we don't care. It's, everybody's sort of a field of equals. But with op-eds, we are looking to, the person writing it does matter in some way. But our definition of expertise is pretty broad. So, I mean, it doesn't mean that you are the expert. You are a spokesperson in that field or anything like that. Having some training in university counts, and just include anything that you think might be relevant in your email, when you're pitching the op-ed. It doesn't necessarily have to end up in your bio, although it might, but, just say, look, I took X amount of years at school in this or something, or, whatever applies. And editors might be more or less picky about it depending on their taste, but then just give them all the info and hope for the best.
That's also something that we cover in the Informed Opinions Writing Commentary Workshop, where we spend some time unpacking where you can claim expertise and what it is in our culture that makes people think, yes, you have an informed opinion on that particular topic. And the reason we call the project Informed Opinions is because you don't have to be an expert on everything. And so the pitch, certainly how you position yourself when you're pitching an editor and how you claim, you might be interested in this commentary on this issue, given my personal experience, given my volunteer capacity, given the 10 years of work that I've done in this related area. So there are ways to bump that up so that you're not just seen as, your identity.
For the self-censorship, I was the chair of CARE Can, grassroots Muslim organization, and I was writing the op-ed under that title. And there were times I had to censor myself because I knew any kind of criticism of our own community would anger some of our donors. And so I had to, and I didn't like that. So I got to the point where I actually quit because I would much rather write freely without the thought of, destroying, or not destroying, but lessening the financial viability of an organization that I cared about. So, at one point, you'll decide perhaps what's more important. I'm not saying quit your job by any means, but, and also there are times when you think, oh my God, what are they going to, it's not as bad as you think it is. And the final thing is, I work for a law firm. I've cleared it with them. I've told them, if you ever have any problem, let me know. But they've been very supportive. They like the publicity. Because now we're also starting to pitch to the business section for writing articles about IP law. So, go for it. Don't stop. Don't let the doubts hold you back.
So I think we'll take one more question. Has anybody else got a burning question? Okay. So 3 questions, and then we'll make our answers quick, and then I'm just going to make a few wrap-up comments. There is still food outside, but let's hear your question.
Hi. So I am a millennial. I don't know anyone who reads a newspaper. I know very few people who watch the news on TV. I know plenty of people who don't even have TVs. We do everything online, and you've been giving us some great, helpful feedback on using op-eds and letters to the editor to build up a public voice. But I'm wondering if you have any specific advice in light of the changing landscape of media, particularly in regards to my generation.
So they're very good point. We are obviously of an age, but there have been lots of comments about the importance of social media and the value of using Twitter as a platform, and blogging and engaging people through those forums. Does anybody else want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not either or. You know, the content that gets shared online comes from somewhere, right? So it's often, you know, I don't read the print newspaper very much either. I work in a print newspaper. So, you know, we have a mobile app, which is fantastic, which is run by a 25-year-old. And we have, you know, we have a tablet app, which is not run by a 25-year-old, but it's good anyway. And, you know, and so I think, you know, it's totally okay to be not into traditional media and also want to be part of the public conversation, and I don't think that's a problem necessarily. And I think even traditional media can offer you a path into it, even if you don't care about dead trees, right? So I think you can, you know, if you do an interview on CBC, that can, you know, that'll be online somewhere, and then once it's online somewhere, it can go anywhere, and you can put it anywhere you want, you know. And if you want to just have the conversation on Tumblr, then that's cool, but now you've got that content. And so I think that's, like, I don't think there's any bad answer, you know. Like I said before, we're not the only gatekeepers to content, which is fantastic. You can do anything you want, but we do have people who can professionally produce things, who can make you look good, makeup artists, which are fantastic. I mean, you know, in some cases. So, I mean, all of that stuff can kind of work for you, and then you have that content that you can share. So.
And I mean, I agree 100%. It's I mean, having both is really the ideal situation because they work from each other. So, you know, if I'm lucky enough to get myself on national television, my Twitter followers immediately, boom, goes, right? But the thing I would say, in my limited experience as a non-millennial, around social media is also give to your network. Give. The more you retweet, the more you know, shout out to somebody because they wrote a good piece or they said something funny or you like their blog, you know, follow Fridays. People remember that and they appreciate that, so that when you have something to say, you want them to come and read your blog and you send it out on Twitter or wherever, they will show you the love back. Yeah. So I mean, that's true in life also, and in social media, as in life.
Okay, so we have 2 more questions. Just before Kate starts, I'm just going to say, as a starter, it's really useful to decide where you want the piece to go before you write it. Because I have, not to Kate, but to a predecessor, sent a great op-ed that I thought was great. And David Watson responded and he said, "Shari, great op-ed. Too bad we just published something in this morning's paper on the very same issue." So it is a good idea to decide the vehicle before you pitch it.
Yeah, and we do differ in terms of word count and that kind of thing too, you know, not by a huge amounts, but there are differences. Yeah, I mean, my strategy, if I were going to go, you know, quit my job and freelance op-eds, would be to submit simultaneously, but to be upfront about that. To say, okay, look, I have sent this to some of your competitors. If I hear back from any of them, I will let you know immediately. Or you can also give a deadline, as long as you're sort of polite about it. You can say, look, if I don't hear back from you in 48 hours, if you're not comfortable simultaneously submitting, or if you happen to know that some of your editors don't like that, you can say, this is yours exclusively for 24 hours. At 24 hours time, I'm going to send it to some other people if I don't hear from you. All of that is cool. As long as we have the information, I think we're happy with that. And in fact, I kind of prefer it when writers do that, because I don't feel guilty for sitting on something for 3 days. Because, you know, from my perspective, 3 days is not a long time to go through that pile of submissions. It takes me that long sometimes, most of the time. But in newspapers, that's a long time. So you can absolutely play the field. We expect you to do that. Otherwise, you're just going to shoot yourself in the foot. And I know there was another part to that question about. Oh, I mean, and the other thing too is that you know, as I mentioned, you know, we get a lot of submissions. We don't have a lot of space. So really, I think one important message is that, you know, rejection of a piece is not, it's certainly not rejection of you as a writer. Absolutely not. And it's probably not even rejection of the piece in the way that you might think. You know, there's so many factors that go into deciding what goes into the newspaper every day. And it could be that the thesis didn't grab us or that the piece wasn't well written, but it's just as likely, probably more likely, that we've had something on the same subject, or we just don't like the balance. We have 5 light things on the page tomorrow. We need something serious, or vice versa. We don't want to have all policy pieces. We want to have something about local. We want to have something about national. You know, I have 2 pages in the newspaper, and I want to balance all of those things every day. So there's all this stuff going on in my head that has nothing to do with your piece. And most of the time, I don't have time to tell 30 people a day exactly why I'm not taking their piece. So I'll just say, sorry, not for me this time. Try me again. And I don't want you to go away from that thinking, oh, I tried op-ed writing and it didn't go well. I'm never going to do that again. So.
Thank you.
I'm just going to say goodbye quickly.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I was going to,
Yeah.
Kathleen, thank you so much. Can you pass her this little Informed Opinions pin?
Thanks. And I'm on Twitter, and you can find me there if you need it, because it is helpful to have doors opened for you, like Shari's done. And I'm happy to help too. If you have a media story you want to get to a local pitch, I might know contacts, so feel free to reach out to me. That's what I do in my volunteer time, is I mentors. I'm sure all of these women also mentor women, so let me know if I can help in any way. And I'm off, and don't judge me on my performance tonight, because I spent all my time with you instead.
Thank you very, very much, Kathleen. Here's a woman who prepares but clearly doesn't over-prepare, because she accepted this invitation even though she's running to be on the National as we speak. So I promised the last question to Diane, and then we're going to wrap up. I think opening doors, I think declining opportunities that might be better served by a woman, introducing female colleagues. Yeah, all of those things are...
Being quiet.
It's hard, Sad day for Catholics everywhere. I think when David made those comments 10 years ago, and when the most recent Pope abdicated, because I have told this story and written this story and broadcast the story, people across the country emailed my husband and said, sad day for Catholics everywhere. But he's very forgiving. It is 4 minutes to 7, and I really appreciate your engagement, and I was going to give you all an opportunity to say some final words, but they might be here for a few more minutes if you want to come and chat with any of them. And they are you all on Twitter? Yeah.
No, we're not all on Twitter, but I just want to say, I think we should all acknowledge the pioneering work that Shari and her organization has done for women in Canada.
It's really its own reward. When a woman that participates in one of our workshops, like Diane or others, has her first op-ed published, or an op-ed published that we supported her in getting out there, it is more gratifying to me than when my own byline is in Kate's paper or the Globe, and nobody has to know that I was even involved. So we do have, as it turns out, a workshop on Thursday morning from 8:30 to 12:30. There are 4 spots left. We do have to charge for the workshops because we're not funded. The only way Informed Opinion survives is through the generosity of sponsors and the universities and partners who pay us to do workshops. And when we have an open workshop like the one on Thursday, we charge an individual professional development fee. So come talk to me if you want to know more about that. And finally, I want to end the evening by thanking these fabulous women who have taken their time to not only speak up in the media and open doors for other women, but to be here this evening. So please join me in a round of applause for them. And I'd also like to thank Amanda Periag, the president of Media Action, for her opening remarks and for basically supporting this project since it first occurred to me 5 years ago. I'd like to thank Natalie Brender, who volunteered specifically for this event. We're always looking for volunteers at the project. It really has a staff of 1, plus the indefatigable Samantha Luchuk, who is my virtual admin assistant. Is she still here? She's up at the back in the yellow sweater. And she's happy to take your donations, in exchange for which we will give you greeting cards, funny greeting cards, or books, just so you know. Also, Loblaws Isabella, thanks to Natalie Brender's engagement, gave us the food outside. So that's also appreciated. And finally, as you leave, you will be given a Coco Camino chocolate bar. And Coco Camino is our only ongoing sponsor, because I personally am addicted to Coco Camino's fair trade chocolate. And when I was in Toronto a few years ago, without my stash, I went onto their website to find out where could I buy it in Toronto. And I sent them an email and said, by the way, I do this work with women across the country. They're affluent, they're intelligent, they're interesting. They probably care about fair trade, and they're women, so they like chocolate better than sex, and I think we should talk. And so, as a result, Coco Camino gives me free chocolate to give out at every workshop that I do across the country. So take your chocolate bar, tweet about Coco Camino, email Coco Camino, and speak up whenever you have the opportunity. Thank you very much.